Belle Owens clutched her tattered valise as the stagecoach rumbled into the dusty streets of Laredo, Texas, in the spring of 1875, her heart as hollow as her family's parting words, "Never darken our doorstep again." The journey from Boston had drained what little spirit remained in her 19-year-old soul, leaving her with nothing but $20 sewn into her petticoat and a bundle of shame her parents had packed for her. The Texas heat slapped her pale face as she stepped down from the coach, her fine Eastern dress immediately collecting dust from the street. Laredo wasn't much to look at: a scattering of wooden buildings, saloons with painted ladies lingering in doorways, and men whose eyes followed her with curious intensity. Belle pulled her bonnet lower, shielding her face from both the sun and scrutiny. "Madam, you look like you could use some direction," a gruff voice said beside her. Belle turned to find an older woman with weather-beaten skin and kind eyes. "I'm looking for work and a place to stay," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the bustle of the town. "Widow Simmons runs a boarding house for respectable women," the woman said, pointing down the street. "As for work, well, there ain't many options for a lady in Laredo, less you're willing to work at the saloon." Belle's cheeks burned. "I'm not that kind of woman," she said firmly, though her family had certainly implied otherwise when they'd packed her off west. The older woman smiled sadly. "Didn't think so. Widow Simmons might know of something proper." Belle thanked her and made her way down the dusty street, acutely aware of the stares from townsfolk, unused to seeing a Boston lady wandering their streets alone. By the time she reached the modest boarding house, her shoes were coated with dust, and her spirits had sunk even lower. Widow Simmons was a stern-looking woman with silver hair pulled tightly into a bun. "No room for charity cases," she said bluntly when Belle inquired about lodging. "I can pay," Belle said, reaching for the hidden money, "and I'm looking for honest work." The widow's expression softened slightly. $2 a week gets you a bed and breakfast. As for work, Dr. Patterson needs someone to help with his filing and correspondence. He lost his assistant last month to marriage. It wasn't what Belle had imagined for herself, but it was honest work. "Thank you, Mrs. Simmons. I'll inquire first thing tomorrow." That night, lying on a narrow bed in a small room that smelled of lye soap and dust, Belle allowed herself to weep silently. The darkness of the room matched the darkness in her heart. Her life in Boston, the parties, the suitors, the promise of a good marriage, all gone because of lies and a family unwilling to stand by her when rumors began to fly. Morning came too quickly, and Belle rose with the sun. She dressed in her plainest gown, knowing she needed to look respectable but not ostentatious. Dr. Patterson's office was a small building near the center of town, and Belle took a deep breath before knocking on the door. "Come in," called a voice from inside. The doctor was an elderly man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He listened patiently as Belle explained her situation, or at least the parts she was willing to share. "I can pay you $3 a week," he said. "The work isn't difficult, but it requires attention to detail and discretion." "Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you." As Belle left the doctor's office, she collided with a solid wall of a man. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up into the sternest pair of gray eyes she'd ever seen. "Careful there, miss," the man said, his voice deep and resonant. Belle stepped back, flustered. "I apologize. I wasn't watching where I was going." The man tipped his hat, revealing dark hair with hints of auburn. A silver star gleamed on his chest, the sheriff's badge. "No harm done." "You're new in town?" "Yes, just arrived yesterday. I'm Belle Owens." "Sheriff Hayes Hunter," he replied, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "Laredo can be rough around the edges, Miss Owens. Be careful where you wander." Something in his tone suggested he already knew more about her than she'd like. Belle nodded quickly and hurried past him, feeling his gaze on her back until she turned the corner. The next few weeks settled into a routine for Belle. She worked diligently for Dr. Patterson, organizing his chaotic files and writing letters to medical suppliers and colleagues. The doctor was kind but distracted, often lost in his medical journals and experiments. In the evenings, she returned to her small room at the boarding house, where she kept to herself, avoiding the curious stares and whispers of the other women. It wasn't until her third week in Laredo that Belle encountered the sheriff again. She was returning from the general store with supplies for the doctor when a group of cowboys, drunk despite the early hour, blocked her path. "Well, ain't you a pretty little thing?" one of them slurred, stepping into her path. "Too fine for the likes of Laredo, I'd say." Belle clutched her packages tighter. "Please let me pass." "What's your hurry, darlin'?" another said, moving closer. "Heard you come from back east. Them eastern girls are supposed to be real sophisticated like." Fear crawled up Belle's spine, but she kept her expression neutral. "I need to return to Dr. Patterson's office immediately." The first cowboy reached out to touch her face. "Don't be like that. That's enough, Jennings." Sheriff Hunter's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stood behind the cowboys, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "The lady asked you to move." The cowboys sobered quickly at the sight of the sheriff. "Just being friendly, Sheriff," Jennings mumbled, backing away. "Be friendly at the saloon. Miss Owens is a respectable woman." The steel in his voice left no room for argument. The men shuffled away, muttering apologies. Belle released the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you, Sheriff Hunter." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "May I escort you back to the doctor's office?" They walked in silence for a few moments before the sheriff spoke again. "Laredo's not Boston, Miss Owens. People here can be direct." Belle stiffened. "How do you know I'm from Boston?" A small smile tugged at his lips. "It's my job to know who comes to my town and why." "And do you know why I'm here?" Belle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes met hers briefly. "I know what people say. I also know that rumors often have little to do with truth." Something about his words, or perhaps the lack of judgment in them, loosened the tight band around Belle's chest. "Thank you for your assistance, Sheriff," she said as they reached the doctor's office. He tipped his hat again. "Miss Owens." That night, Belle found herself thinking about Hayes Hunter. There was something solid about him, like the mountains she'd glimpsed from the stagecoach window, immovable, reliable. She pushed the thoughts away. She hadn't come to Laredo to find a man. She'd come to rebuild the life that had been shattered by lies and betrayal. As summer bloomed in Laredo, bringing sweltering heat and afternoon thunderstorms, Belle's life fell into a predictable pattern. Work, meals at the boarding house, solitary walks when the heat abated in the evenings. She exchanged pleasantries with the townspeople but kept them at arm's length, afraid that the whispers that had followed her from Boston might start again. Sheriff Hunter appeared regularly at the doctor's office, sometimes with an injury that needed tending, other times with official business. Each time, his eyes lingered on Belle a moment longer than necessary, and each time she felt a small flutter in her chest that she desperately tried to ignore. "The sheriff seems to find a lot of reasons to visit lately," Dr. Patterson commented one afternoon after Hayes had left. "And they all seem to coincide with your presence." Belle felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sure that's just coincidence, Dr. Patterson," the old doctor chuckled. "I've known Hayes Hunter since he was a boy. He doesn't do anything by coincidence." One evening in late July, Belle was returning from a rare trip to the millinery shop, her first small luxury since arriving in Laredo, when she heard rapid hoofbeats behind her. She turned to see Sheriff Hunter dismounting from a lathered horse. "Miss Owens," he said, his usual composure fractured by what looked like concern. "I need to speak with you privately." Alarm shot through her. "What's happened?" He glanced around the busy street. "Not here. Would you walk with me to my office?" The sheriff's office was a simple building with a desk, a few chairs, and cells in the back. Hayes closed the door behind them, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair, a gesture Belle had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "I received a telegram today," he said without preamble. "From Boston." Belle felt the blood drain from her face. "I see." It was from a Mr. Charles Pembroke, inquiring if a Belle Owens had arrived in Laredo and demanding information about your whereabouts. The name hit Belle like a physical blow. Charles Pembroke, the man whose lies had destroyed her reputation and led to her exile. What did you tell him?" Hayes studied her face. "Nothing yet. I wanted to speak with you first." Belle sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "He's the reason I'm here," she whispered. "He's the reason my family sent me away." Hayes pulled a chair close to hers, sitting so their knees nearly touched. "Tell me," he said simply. And for the first time since the night that had changed her life, Belle told her story. How Charles Pembroke, son of her father's business partner, had proposed marriage, how she had declined, preferring another suitor. How Charles, in revenge, had spread rumors that he had compromised her virtue. How her parents, more concerned with their social standing than their daughter's truth, had believed him and sent her west, until the scandal dies down, which they all knew meant forever. We never. Belle's voice broke, but no one believed me, not even my own family. Hayes reached out and took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "I believe you, Belle." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her heart twist strangely. "Why, you don't know me. I've been watching you since you arrived," he admitted. "I've seen how you carry yourself, how you work, how you speak to others. That tells me more about your character than any rumor from 2,000 miles away." Belle looked down at their joined hands. "What will you tell him?" "That depends on what you want," Hayes said. "I can tell him you never arrived, sent him searching elsewhere, or I can tell him the truth that you're here, building a new life, and that he's not welcome to disturb it." "Would you really do that?" Belle asked, barely daring to hope. Hayes squeezed her hands. "I protect the people of this town." "And like it or not, Miss Owens, you've become one of us." For the first time in months, Belle felt a real smile tug at her lips. "I think I'd like that." The next day, Hayes sent 2 telegrams, one to Charles Pembroke, stating simply that no woman by that name had passed through Laredo. The other to the sheriff in the next county, asking him to keep an eye out for a Boston man who might be causing trouble. That evening, Hayes appeared at the boarding house and asked Belle to join him for supper at the hotel restaurant, the finest establishment in Laredo, which wasn't saying much, but it was a step above the saloon dining rooms. "People will talk," Belle warned him as they walked down the street together. Hayes offered his arm. "Let them. I've found that the truth has a way of outlasting gossip." Over a simple meal of beefsteak and potatoes, they really talked. Hayes told her about growing up in Texas, fighting in the war, returning to find his parents' ranch taken over by cattle barons, and turning to law enforcement instead. Belle shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her love of books, her dreams of seeing the world beyond Massachusetts. As weeks turned to months, these dinners became a regular occurrence. Sometimes they walked along the river afterwards, sometimes Hayes escorted her directly back to the boarding house. Always, he was a gentleman, never presuming more than Belle was willing to give. The townsfolk did indeed talk, but not in the way Belle had feared. Instead of whispers about her past, they spoke of the transformation of their stoic sheriff. "Never seen Hayes smile so much," the blacksmith commented one day when Belle passed his shop. "You're good for him, Miss Owens." September brought cooler temperatures and news that shattered Belle's growing contentment. A letter arrived from Boston from her younger sister, smuggled past their parents. It contained news that Charles Pembroke was traveling west, determined to find Belle. "He says he will bring you back and make you his wife," her sister wrote. "Father has given his blessing." When Belle showed the letter to Hayes, his face darkened with anger. "He won't take you anywhere you don't want to go," he promised, but fear had taken root in Belle's heart. "You don't know him, Hayes. His family is powerful, with connections even here in the West." "So we'll be ready," Hayes said, his jaw set in determination. For 2 weeks, they waited, tension building with each day. Hayes assigned deputies to watch the stagecoach and train stations. Belle jumped at every unfamiliar face on the street. And then, on a crisp October morning, Charles Pembroke strode into Dr. Patterson's office as if he owned it. "Belle, my darling," he said, his Boston accent sharp in the small Texas office. "I've come to take you home." Belle stood frozen behind her desk. Charles looked out of place in his fine Eastern suit, but his smile held the same arrogant confidence she remembered. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Charles," he laughed as if she'd made a joke. "Don't be absurd. Your parents are expecting us. The scandal has died down, and we can be married before Christmas." "I believe the lady declined your offer," came Hayes's voice from the doorway. He stepped into the office, his presence filling the small space. Charles turned, irritation flashing across his handsome features. "This is a private conversation. Who are you?" Sheriff Hayes Hunter, he replied, the star on his chest catching the light. And you're causing a disturbance in my town. Charles's expression shifted to one Belle recognized all too well calculating, manipulative. Sheriff, I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter. Belle's parents have entrusted her to my care. I'm 19 years old, Belle said, finding her voice. I don't need anyone's care or permission. Charles's friendly facade cracked. You ungrateful little, he stepped toward her, but Hayes moved faster, placing himself between them. That's enough, Hayes said, his voice dangerously quiet. Miss Owens has made her position clear. I suggest you leave Laredo on the next stage. Charles straightened his jacket, his smile turning cold. You don't understand the situation, Sheriff. Belle and I have an understanding. She's just being difficult. There was never any understanding, Belle said firmly. Only lies you told when I refused your proposal. Charles's face darkened. No one refuses me. Your parents believe me. Everyone in Boston believes me. Your reputation is already ruined. Maybe in Boston, Hayes said. But here in Laredo, Miss Owens is known as a woman of integrity and kindness. The only reputation at risk right now is yours. For a moment, Belle thought Charles might lunge at Hayes. Instead, he turned to her with venom in his voice. You think you can hide in this backwater forever, that your parents will ever take you back after this latest insult. You have nothing, Belle, nothing and no one. She has me, Hayes said simply, the words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Charles looked between them, understanding dawning on his face. You can't be serious. Him, a frontier lawman, Belle moved to stand beside Hayes, her fear replaced by something stronger. I believe you were just leaving, Mr. Pembroke. Charles stormed out, promising retribution, but his threats sounded hollow now. When he was gone, Belle turned to Hayes, her heart pounding. Did you mean that, what you said? Hayes took her hand. Every word. But I should probably say it properly. To Belle's astonishment, he lowered himself to one knee. Belle Owens, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears filled Belle's eyes, not tears of shame or sorrow, but of joy. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town. The entire community turned out, from Dr. Patterson, who gave Belle away, to Widow Simmons, who sniffled quietly in the front pew, to the Cowboys, who stood awkwardly in their Sunday best at the back of the church. Belle wore a simple white dress made by the town's seamstress, with wildflowers in her hair instead of an elaborate veil. Hayes looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new suit, his sheriff's badge polished to a high shine on his chest. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Hayes kissed her with such tenderness that Belle felt her heart might burst. The cheers of the townsfolk echoed in the small church, a sound of acceptance and belonging that Belle had feared she would never hear again. Charles Pembroke left on the evening stage the day after Hayes's proposal, but Belle knew it wasn't the end of the matter. A week after the wedding, a letter arrived from her parents, a cold, formal note acknowledging her marriage, but making it clear they considered her dead to them. Hayes found her crying over the letter on the porch of their small house, the sheriff's residence that was now their home. Without a word, he sat beside her and pulled her into his arms. They're fools, he said simply, and someday they'll realize what they've thrown away. Belle leaned against his solid warmth. I just never thought, never imagined I would lose my entire family. Not your entire family, Hayes reminded her gently. You have me now, and someday, God willing, we'll have children of our own. The thought brought a smile to Belle's tear-stained face. Our own family, I'd like that. Winter came to Laredo, bringing cool breezes and occasional frost, but none of the blizzards Belle had known in Boston. She settled into her role as the sheriff's wife, still working for Dr. Patterson 3 days a week, but also taking on responsibilities in the community. She started a small lending library in a corner of the general store, using books she ordered from San Antonio and donations from townspeople. Hayes remained sheriff, but Belle noticed subtle changes in him. He smiled more easily, laughed more readily, and the townsfolk responded to this warmer version of the man they'd respected but kept at a distance. In February, a surprise telegram arrived from Belle's sister. She was engaged to be married in the spring and wanted Belle to attend the wedding. "Mother and father don't know I'm inviting you," she wrote. "But I miss you terribly and I want my sister at my wedding." "We should go," Hayes said when Belle showed him the telegram. Belle shook her head. "I can't go back there, the things people will say." "Let them say what they want," Hayes replied, taking her hands. "You'll arrive as Mrs. Hayes Hunter with your husband by your side, and anyone who dares insult you will answer to me." The journey to Boston in April was long and tiring, but as the train pulled into the station, Belle felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. Hayes squeezed her hand reassuringly as they descended to the platform. Her sister was waiting, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "Belle," she cried, rushing forward to embrace her. "Oh, I've missed you so much." The wedding was a grand Boston affair with hundreds of guests and elaborate decorations. Belle and Hayes attended, drawing curious stares and whispered comments. Charles Pembroke was there too, his face darkening when he saw them, but he kept his distance. Belle's parents were cold at first, barely acknowledging their daughter's presence. But as the celebration continued, her mother approached while Hayes was speaking with Belle's uncle. "You look well," she said stiffly. Belle nodded. "I am well, happy." Her mother's eyes flickered to Hayes across the room. "Your husband seems like a good man." "The best I've ever known," Belle replied honestly. A moment of silence stretched between them. "We received a letter," her mother finally said, "from Charles Pembroke's former valet. He confirmed your version of events, said Charles had been inappropriate with other young women as well." Belle felt a wave of vindication wash over her. "I see. Your father and we should have." Her mother faltered, then squared her shoulders. "We were wrong, Belle. We should have believed you." It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. When they returned to Laredo 2 weeks later, Belle felt lighter, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm after their return. In the summer, Belle discovered she was expecting their first child, news that delighted Hayes beyond measure. "A son or daughter," he marveled, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our family is growing." Their son, Henry, was born the following winter, a strong, healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. A letter arrived from Boston 2 weeks later, containing a silver rattle and a note from Belle's parents expressing their desire to meet their grandson someday. "Will you forgive them?" Hayes asked as they stood over Henry's cradle, watching him sleep. Belle considered the question. "Someday, perhaps, but not for me, for Henry. Every child deserves to know their family, even the imperfect parts." Hayes pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You amaze me, Belle Hunter, your capacity for forgiveness, for love." "I learned it from you," she said softly. "You believed me when no one else would. You saw the truth when others only saw what they wanted to see." As the years passed, their family grew. Henry was joined by a sister, Hannah, and later by another brother, William. Belle's parents eventually visited Laredo, awkward and out of place in the frontier town, but genuinely trying to mend the broken relationship with their daughter. Belle's lending library expanded to a proper town library, housed in its own building on Main Street. Hayes remained sheriff until a bullet in his shoulder during a bank robbery convinced him to retire and focus on the small ranch they had purchased outside town. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hayes took Belle on a picnic to the spot by the river where they had walked during their courtship. The cottonwood trees rustled overhead as they spread a blanket on the grassy bank. "Do you ever regret it?" Hayes asked as they watched the river flow past. "Staying in Laredo, marrying a simple lawman instead of returning to Boston society." Belle turned to look at the man who had saved her in more ways than one, the man whose belief in her had given her the strength to rebuild her life. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment." Hayes smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way Belle had come to love. "You know, when you first arrived in Laredo, people said you were running from something scandalous." Belle laughed softly. "And what did you think, Sheriff Hunter?" He took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band he had placed there a decade ago. "I thought you were the most beautiful, dignified woman I'd ever seen, and that whoever had let you go was the biggest fool in creation." Belle leaned against his shoulder, watching the sun begin to set over the Texas landscape that had become more home to her than Boston had ever been. "Their foolishness was my fortune," she murmured. "It brought me to you." As twilight deepened around them, Hayes wrapped his arm around his wife, both of them content in the knowledge that sometimes being sent away in shame can lead you exactly where you're meant to be, into the arms of someone who sees your truth and loves you not despite your past, but including it as part of the whole person you've become.